So I've entered into some reflections here for people and myself, mostly myself, just to clarify things as I read this book in searching for order in reality. It's kind of like we're seeking to show something about the Platonic cosmos. Like, how is the Platonic cosmos? The Platonic cosmos is something that if we weren't in it at all, it yet would be a thinking thing. It'd be a thinking substance, independent of ourself. So it would be something that is actually each thinking being could be a knowing of reality, not just a thinking that reality is such and such. So delusional thinking for Plato doesn't happen if we do the right kind of thinking. So then you could know within Plato's philosophy that you are thinking something real because you are connecting to the ideas that allow you to think anything. Like any type of thought for Plato is an instance of participation, methexis. He uses the word methexis. Participation in the forms of reality because I'm perceiving the forms of reality in my own existence. And a female who thinks about the universe is also participating in the transcendent idea or realm of ideas that the things that are perceived by the senses imperfectly are based on. It's a perfection that the imperfect senses, or our senses of things, or our sensing of things, is based on. So the imperfections are the limitations to our perceiving, not the limitations of reality. Like reality itself is perfect, Plato would say, but our participation in it is mediated. Like we have a mediated sense of how things are in themselves because we're not the absolute mind of the whole cosmos, but when we're understanding parts of the cosmos, or something like love or friendship or goodness or poetry or justice, we are perceiving something of the reality of those things because those things are real. You know, whereas for some philosophers today, they begin with a skepticism because they only accept what's empirical. So they only accept like what you can show another person to be palpable to the senses and real. So an empiricist philosopher is going to say justice is not really real because in no sense can it be justified or given a justification as something that you could sense. But then that's really not adequate because some people would say, but then you have instances of justice. You know, if there's a trial, for instance, and somebody's found guilty of having done something that is defined as unjust to another, then there must be something like a participation in the just. So then an empiricist would have the problem of like having to deny certain aspects of reality, which most people say, well, we have an idea of that. And Plato would say, well, that's precisely the point. You have an idea of justice, but nothing in the human world is going to be the idea of justice. It's going to participate in the idea of justice, or it's going to participate in the idea of goodness, or it's going to participate in the idea of the poetic, or it's going to participate in the idea of the friendly, or whatever else can be conceived, what other ideas can be conceived. Now, Aristotle, the philosopher, came along, and after 20 years in Plato's academy, is like, I don't accept any of this. Like, this is nonsense. There's nothing outside of what we pick up from the world that we're in, and just our sense of the world and our experiencing of the things directly in the world, the form of the earth, the form of a stone, the sight of the sun, the measurement of angles. All these things, Aristotle says, are not anything that you need any kind of realm of ideas for. They're things that you develop ideas from the reality of the things, from the earth. So whereas Plato started with heaven and he descended to earth, Aristotle started with earth and he ascended to the ideas. So really, it's a difference of emphasis in the two philosophies. The two philosophies are not utterly at odds with each other. They are somewhat, in the end, you could see how they were different approaches to knowing and to knowledge, but that they are different. They're genuine differences between the two philosophers. But the more practical, I should say, for Aristotle, he was a more practical. Aristotle was the one that gave us the idea of the universal empire, his own philosophy. See, Plato was too busy thinking about the ideas and trying to understand the heavenly realm, whereas Aristotle was bestriding the earth, if you will. Aristotle was a philosopher who came along and said, hey, we need to organize politics so that we can get a hold of the whole earth so we can understand everything. He wasn't like a conqueror who wanted to harm people or anything, but he was like, if we're going to understand everything that is, we have to know everything that is earthly. Plato's always talking about heaven. Let's talk about what earth is first, because we're on earth. Whereas Plato was saying, let's get above earth, because earth is deceiving us, and the earth is giving us misperceptions. Aristotle is saying the only correct perceptions that we have are of the things that are, and that's the earthly. That's the grounded sense that we have of being. So the two philosophers are on a different level. Plato, we get the idea that Plato's the more ascetic person. He wasn't the one who was satisfying sensual pleasures, whereas Aristotle is reputed to be kind of a womanizer. He's always out with a lady. He's always talking about the things that really are, the touch, the feel, the embrace, the breast in his hand, the nipple in his mouth. Whereas Plato is Plato's like pointing to heaven and saying, hey, porn's bad. Don't look at porn, don't touch things, don't touch people, don't do anything. Like, think of the purity of ideas. And Aristotle's like, but I like the feel of the butt. I like the butt of this lady, so I can put my hand on her butt. So it's like different emphases in the two philosophers. Aristotle's like, let's go out and have some party. Let's go out and have some fun. And Plato's like, you better stay inside and you better not touch butt, and you better not touch breast or butt, because that you will not be able to you will not be able to have the pure experience of something otherworldly and something amazing if you are too pure. It's too pure or too impure. For Plato, he's like, if you're too impure, then you don't have an experience of the pureness of things. And Aristotle's like, if you're too pure, then you don't really have knowledge of anything. So the two philosophers were at odds, but they started from the same types of things. They both thought that both Aristotle and Plato thought that Socrates' questioning led to the two different ways of experiencing. The purity of the one quested for by Plato, and the earth, more earth-based. Geometry is measure of the earth. Geometry, measure of the earth. And Aristotle was the measure of the earth, and the one who put forth the empiricistic rationalism, and Plato was the more idealistic, the one who pointed to the empirical realm of the ideas as being what everything is based on. But in a sense, there was also a unity, because Plato thought you couldn't really have knowledge of some things you had to quest for knowledge of in the empirical world. But for Plato, it was an idea of taking the empirical world and then ascending to the world that transcended the empirical world. For Aristotle, it was descending, if you will, from the ideas to the very things we touch, feel, sense, love, hate, have experience of, are in the middle of in life, and that's what gives us the real knowledge. Whereas Plato kept, beckoning, like Aristotle, just come back to the academy, come back to the essence of things in their purity. And Aristotle was saying, I think I better keep my feet on the earth. So there's like the two different ways of these two thinkers of antiquity who have greatnesses in common. Aristotle's philosophy became so important for scholasticism and for the Catholic Church that Aquinas, the father of the knowledge of Catholicism, Aquinas referred to Aristotle as the philosopher. Not just a philosopher, but the philosopher. So in a very high sense, I did honor to my professor Harry Gensler of logic from Loyola University. In the past, he was from Loyola, now he's at a different university, by saying that Aristotle, if he had seen his achievement with the STAR test, might have said, "You're the second Aristotle," because Harry had embraced, Harry Gensler, he had come to understand something about all syllogisms which could be tested. See, all syllogisms be like, whatever, all Muslims are philosophers, all philosophers are human, all humans are Muslims, some syllogistic reasoning like that. But Harry Gensler could be listening to Tennessee Williams, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And Harry could have that movie on one night when he was doing some logical thinking, and then it could come to him like a revelation that all syllogisms that you could formulate could be tested by something he called the star method, so that you could, put stars on the syllogisms and then count the number of stars, and then you could tell whether they're valid or not. Which is a pretty amazing thing if you think about it, because just like Ramanujan, Harry was participating in an almost infinite number, testing almost an infinite number of syllogisms in his mind, and able to create that result, just like Ramanujan using an infinite, almost like his mind is able to work with an infinite set. And it's a very high compliment that I pay to him in saying that if Aristotle had been alive, he would say, "You're the second Aristotle, because you did that." See, but Harry is taught in his church and in Jesuitism that you have to not have pride, because if he had too much pride, then he'd be putting himself in the place of God. And for Loyola graduates like myself, it's ad majorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God, not to the greater glory of the self. So there's a difference. See, we guard against, in Jesuitism, we guard against ourself displacing God. That's Loyola, my alma mater, to the greater glory of God.